Welcome to your second week video tutorials. For this first tutorial this week, I want to look at the concept of a visual analysis, or otherwise known as a formal analysis. You're going to hear your instructor referring to this a lot, as well as your readings. And as you go through your MindEdge materials this week and beyond, you'll be seeing more examples of formal analysis. And you'll be doing this in your discussion boards as well as in your final paper too. So just wanted to clarify what we are talking about when we say a formal analysis. So what is a formal analysis? It's a close look at a work of art, and it's really looking at it in two ways. First, it looks at, or it's a study of, the visual details or the formal details of a work of art. So this might be bringing in concepts of composition, how a work of art is laid out overall. What kinds of color palettes are used in the work and what kind of effects those might have on us. Light, does the artist use a lot of contrast between light and dark? Is an overall dark painting, overall bright, etc. Brushwork, when we look at the details of how the paint is applied to the canvas, for example. Is it tight and linear, or is it loose and sort of casual? So we look at it in terms of the visual details. We also want to think about the effects of those details. This is also part of the formal analysis. So when we think about the effects, we think about the mood, the possible tone, the emotional effect that we might have when we look at a work of art. Is it overall a happy work? Is it a somber work? Is it one that is shocking or powerful that grabs our attention that way? And what does it ask us to focus on? How do those visual details really pull us in to focus on a particular element? So I want to look at some examples, one that will be familiar to those of you in 201, and then another that will be familiar to those of you in 202, but the concepts are quite similar. So if we do a formal analysis with our first work of art here, we ask ourselves our two main questions: what details do we see, and what effects do those details have on us as a viewer? So some of those formal qualities we might notice. Figures here, male and female, a pharaoh and a queen in this ancient Egyptian sculpture. Overall, the composition and the structure of it is very block-like. It's not very fluid. The figures aren't moving in kind of long, exaggerated, or extended motion. We do have some detail in the beard and the headdress of the individuals, but the features and the faces are rather generic. We get the impression of a face. We get the impression of what makes the figure on the left male and what makes the figure on the right female, but they're not necessarily detailed. The effects that those details can have on us as a viewer, we get a sense of rigidity or solid, kind of structured element here. Again, not those long, exaggerated, or elongated motions. It's block-like, so we get this sense of rigidity. That can also give us a sense of permanence or stillness. The figures have their legs astride just a little bit, but for the most part they're standing very still, and they are kind of two melding into one form here. So it gives us a sense of stillness as well as permanence. We don't get the idea that many little pieces of this work of art could break off over time. And again, when we look at the date of an ancient Egyptian work and kind of marvel at the fact that all of its pieces are still here today, that sense of permanence is definitely there. It can also give us a sense of power and importance. The fact that this sculpture is carved to represent these two figures, the pharaoh and the queen, gives us a sense of there must be some sort of power or importance to these figures to create this work of art in honor of them. And we get the idea of the human figure, as we mentioned before, but not necessarily realistic or detailed. So we don't get the sense that we're really looking at portraits of this pharaoh and his queen, but maybe idealized images of them. So we're not getting the sense that this is necessarily what they look like in real life, but we could get enough of a clue to let us know who they might be, to identify them. So the formal analysis really just focuses on the visual details that we can see and the effect that those details have on us. What's nice about the formal analysis at this point is that anybody can do it. Any one of us can do it. We don't have to know anything about the work of art or have any background in ancient Egyptian culture or anything like that. We're just focusing on what we see and the kind of effects that those details might have. Second example I mentioned was something that for those of you in 202 you might find familiar. It's a work by Rembrandt. But again, we can do a formal analysis without having to know who did the work or when it was created, because the formal analysis is just taking into details and taking into account what we see and the effects that those visual elements might have on us. So our big two questions: what details do you see, and what effects do those details have? What we see here is a landscape. We have a shoreline with water, trees, and sky. We see what appears to be a woman being carried away on the back of a bull, and the other figures are there resting on the shore, some with their arms raised. They have vivid expressions while they're watching this scene. As far as color palette and overall composition, we've got this rich color palette in the fabrics and the grass and in the trees, and contrasts in dark and light. So on the left side of the composition, we have this very light, bright sky and water, and then to the right, the land gets darker. We get moved into more shadow. So again, we're not necessarily worrying about what this means just yet, or what Rembrandt's trying to tell us, or trying to bring in those kinds of factual elements about the work. We're just thinking about what we see and the effects that those details might have on us. So there's some kind of a story being told here. There's action taking place within a setting. In my formal analysis, I don't necessarily need to know this yet, what that story is, but I know that something is happening here. There's a story being told. There seems to be a sense of fear or terror or concern for those who are watching the scene from the shoreline as this woman's being carried away. So that effect of the composition and the colors and the gestures of the figures leads us to think there's this sense of concern or fear. And then there's definitely a lot of drama, action, and energy and possible emotion happening in this work. Again, that sense of the light versus the dark is very sharp and contrasting. So that adds to our sense of drama and sort of shock or wonder as to what's happening here. So again, with the formal analysis, this is kind of the fun first step of what you're doing when you really go in to look at a work of art in detail, because you can just do it based on what you see in front of you. We'll talk more in another video tutorial about applying context and applying your research and your understanding to those works of art. But before you get to that step, you want to make sure you've carefully done a formal analysis where you've looked closely at the work of art in the way that we've done here with these examples.